Well, we are back from spring break. I don't know about you all, but it was kind of nice, especially at the beginning of the week with those nice warm temperatures. Did a lot of yard work and stayed close to home, trying to stay as far away from people as we can, which I'm hoping that you're doing as well, trying to do our part to stop this virus that seems to be rampant in other parts of the United States. So we have, I guess, about 3 weeks before we are supposedly supposed to be back into school, which fingers crossed that we are. It's nice to be home, but I'm kind of ready to get everything back to normal. So this is our normal. I did want to talk with you all about the test that you took Friday before spring break. I'm actually filming this on Friday. You'll get it on Monday. But as of Friday at 11 o'clock, I only had about, trying to remember the number, probably 14 out of 44 of you fifth graders have turned your test in digitally. I'm going to be running to school either late this afternoon or first thing in the morning to see who might have dropped some off there at the school. So I will be making some phone calls on Monday to some parents asking where tests are. So I'm hoping that between now and Easter Sunday, if you've not done the test, that you will have taken it and gotten it online for me to take a look at. So just so you know, guys, I'm keeping track and we need the scores. That being said, I want you to take out your Holes book. That's where we're going to start today. I mean, you should have Team Talk 1 to go with Holes as well. So if you can grab those real quick, if you've not already done so. You'll need a pencil or a pen as we go through this lesson as well. You should know the drill. All right, let's grab those. I'm gonna grab a drink of water while you do that. Better, found a straw. All right, so one of the things about this particular story, Holes, is that it is considered a narrative. And so I want you to think for just a minute, what is a narrative? And a narrative is a story that has connected events to it so that we can truly see how it all kind of comes together to tell that fictional kind of story. Now, what is an expository reading? So we kind of want to think about the differences between an expository reading and a narrative. So think about, what do you think an expository reading would be? Can you think of some examples of an expository reading? So an expository reading is informational reading. It's things that you read to learn something. So it could be a textbook. It could be magazine articles. It could be newspapers. It could be a type of trade book that you buy to learn how to play a video game better. Might have those tips and tricks on how to get to different levels or how to kill certain things. It's where you are learning about something. Narrative reading is just a story for enjoyment. It's where you're trying to find those connective events to take you on a journey, to take you somewhere else as far as expanding your imagination. And so Holes is one of those types of books. I've been doing quite a bit of reading myself while we've been off, rereading some old favorites, as well as finishing up a particular series that I'd started, I guess, about in January or February. And I love to read to take me somewhere else. My oldest son has been kind of quarantined with us. He came in from Colorado for his sister's wedding that really was downsized to 9 people. And so he didn't even get to go, but he's here. And so he does a lot of expository reading. That is his joy of reading and his comfort zone. So he and I have totally different types of love of reading. So what I'd like you to think about right now, hold on just a second. You need to leave the room. We're getting shoes. My daughter's in the room. She needs to go away. All right. So what we're wanting to think about is settings of stories. So narratives always have a very specific setting. And this story setting is in the desert. So I want you to think about how this setting would affect a story, or how would it affect you if this is where you were, or in this case, where our characters are. How would a setting of a desert affect the story? Just think a minute. This is where I pull my sticks. All right, so when I think of a desert, I think about hot. I think of very little shade and very little water. I think of very uncomfortable situations. And so when I think about how would that affect our story or our character, to me it would be a miserable place. I would just be like, get me out of here. And so our 6th graders just finished up Hatchet, and their setting was the Canadian wilderness. And we talked about in their book, how the setting provided all of the things that the main character needed. And so if I had to be stranded on one of these settings, I would prefer the Canadian wilderness over a desert, because in the Canadian wilderness you have water, you have possibility of fishing, you have trees to build a shelter, you have water to drink, you have things that could help you survive. Whereas in this desert, it's not so much an environment that evokes living in. So we want to think about the setting of our story as we go through this particular book. Now, I want us to look at our vocabulary this week. So our vocabulary is recycle, and I'm going to stop right here, let my husband get through the kitchen. Can you tell from my face I'm not a happy woman? All right, so recycle means to use something again, and that is something that we do as a school, and you may do as a family, collecting plastics or paper or cardboard, and then taking them to the recycling center so that those objects can be reused. So recycle is to use again. Increasingly means more and more. I become more increasingly annoyed as my family keep coming into the kitchen and disturbing us as we're going through this lesson. So more and more. Collapse is to fall down. My other Teen Talks just collapsed and fell down over here. And so to collapse is to fall down. And there are days that my hip, because I'm old, gets a little catch in it, and it makes me feel like I'm going to fall down or to collapse on that right side. Retrieved is fetched. We have a cat, an inside cat, that when we throw an object through the room, it will go and get it and bring it back. It plays fetch, or it has fetched items back to us. Humiliating is embarrassing. It's where you've done something, something's happened to you where you just can't bear it. You're like, oh my gosh. Or your parent does something that is absolutely embarrassing. Despicable is terrible. It's beyond bad. It's where you just can't hardly get over it. Despicable is terrible. Staggered, and the ed there is telling us it's past tense. It's walked unsteadily or not steady. So staggered is to walk unsteadily. And survive. We all know what survive is. Survive is to where we are able to stay alive, possibly during a difficult situation. Now, our end in mind this week, and I'm going to take it off the hooks, is I will identify qualities of the main character by analyzing their thoughts, their words, and their feelings. And I've highlighted main character because, like in all narratives, you will have multiple characters through the story. But we are wanting to just focus on that particular main character, the big character that is predominant through our whole story. And we're looking at the thoughts of the main character, the words that they are using in the text, as well as their feelings. And that is going to help us figure out those qualities of that person. So let's think about us. Think about yourself as I hang this back up. And if somebody had to describe you, how would they describe you? And so I really want you to think about that for just a moment. What stands out about you that someone would say? And you can't say, oh. What would stand out about me, I think, and it's kind of hard when you're kind of trying to identify your own characteristic, I will be honest. But what people would say about me is that I'm a good friend, that I can keep a secret. And to me, those are an excellent quality about someone. So if I'm having a conversation with someone and they say, I don't want you to, please don't tell someone. If I say, I won't tell, I won't tell. And so that would be an example of a character trait or a quality of me. I might say that another one of mine would be that I'm a good mom. And I'm a good mom. And examples of that would be my thoughts, words, and feelings is through my words, is that I'm encouraging to my kids, that I'm always trying to build them up for them to understand how valued they are and how their ideas are important. So to me, that is being a good mom. I'm not one of those moms that's like, well, that's stupid. I don't know why you want to do that for. You're never going to make any money doing that. Even though I might think that that's kind of a dumb idea, I might say, well, you know what? If that's what you want to do, think about it. But that may need to be something that you do on the side. What is going to be your job that's going to allow you to do that thing that you really love until maybe it takes off. I have a daughter that loves to draw and is very artistic. But what's the job that you can do to make money and survive that allows you to do your art until you get an art base? Or I have a son that's really into music, and he wants to be a songwriter. Well, you got to have a day job that allows you to pay the bills to get to do what you love. So my words kind of show that I'm a good mom. So when we think about our end in mind here, it's all about identifying those quality traits of that main character. And so that's what we're going to do. So let's think about how is it that we do characterize people, and I think that what we're going to be doing throughout this text is we are going to be analyzing those characters, and how do we do that? How do we analyze characters in a story? Well, we analyze them through their thoughts and their feelings and the emotions that they kind of evoke as we go through this. Their words tell us about them. Are they using positive words and phrases? Are they always talking down about themselves? Are they using mean and ugly words to other people? You know, words are powerful, and they really help us figure out somebody's intent or the type of person that they are inside. Now, let's go ahead and open up our book. We're going to look to page 3. That's where I kind of want us to start today. Okay? Is everyone there? I miss you guys. I miss having my class. I miss having my kids. So, all right. Chapter 1. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There once was a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it is just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a town of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled up and dried up along with the lake and the people who lived there. Well, during the summer, the daytime temperature hovers around 95 degrees in the shade, if you can find any shade. There's not much shade in a big dry lake. The only trees are 2 old oaks on the eastern edge of the lake. A hammock is stretched between the 2 trees, and a log cabin stands behind that. The campers are forbidden to lie in the hammock. It belongs to the warden. The warden owns the shade. Well, out on the lake, rattlesnakes and scorpions find shade under rocks and in the holes dug by the campers. Here's a good rule to remember about rattlesnakes and scorpions. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you, usually. Sometimes a camper will try to be bitten by a scorpion or even a small rattlesnake. Then he will get to spend a day or 2 recovering in his tent, instead of having to dig a hole out on the lake. But you don't want to be bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You will die a slow and painful death, always. Well, if you get bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard, you might as well go into the shade of the oak tree and lie in the hammock. There's nothing anyone can do for you anymore. Chapter 2. Well, the reader is probably asking, why would anyone go to Camp Green Lake? But most campers aren't given a choice. Why, Camp Green Lake is a camp for bad boys. If you take a bad boy and you make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. That was what some people thought. Stanley Yelnats was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Camp Green Lake. Well, Stanley was from a poor family and he had never been to camp before. Chapter 3. So Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver or the guard. Well, the guard sat next to the driver with the seat turned around facing Stanley and a rifle across his lap. Well, Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to his armrest. His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, and a box of stationery his mother had given him. He had promised to write to her at least once a week. Well, he looked out the window, although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. And he was on a long bus ride to nowhere, and the bus wasn't air-conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost as stifling as the handcuffs. Well, Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going away to camp for a while, just like rich kids do. But when Stanley was younger, he used to play with stuffed animals and pretend the animals were at camp. Camp fun and games, he'd called it. Sometimes he'd have them play soccer with a marble. Other times they'd run an obstacle course or do bungee jumping off a table, tied to broken rubber bands. Now Stanley tried to pretend he was going to Camp Fun and Games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. Well, he didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teachers sometimes made cruel comments without realizing it. Well, on his last day of school, his math teacher, Miss Bell, taught ratios. Well, as an example, she chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy, and Miss Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3-to-1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them. Well, Stanley was arrested later that day. Well, he looked at the guard who sat slumped in his seat and wondered if he had fallen asleep. Well, the guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. He had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was all because of his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they always blamed Stanley's no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Supposedly, he had a great-great-grandfather who had stolen a pig from a one-legged gypsy, and she had put a curse on him and all his descendants. Stanley and his parents didn't believe in curses, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt good to be able to blame someone else. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so he looked out the window at the vast emptiness, and he watched the rise and fall of a telephone wire. And in his mind, he could hear his father's gruff voice softly singing to him. Now, I'm not going to sing because I'm not a singer, so I'm just going to say it. If only the woodpecker's sighs, the bark on the tree was just a little bit softer. While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries to the moon, if only, if only. Sounds like a piece of poetry. It was a song his father used to sing to him. The melody was sweet and sad, but Stanley's favorite part was when his father would howl the word moon. Well, the bus hit a small bump and the guard sat up instantly alert. And Stanley's father was an inventor. And to be a successful inventor, you need 3 things. Intelligence, that's smarts. Perseverance, which is never giving up when things are tough. And just a little bit of luck. Well, Stanley's father was smart and had a lot of perseverance. Once he started a project, he would work on it for years, often going days without sleep. He just never had any luck. Every time an experiment failed, Stanley could hear him cursing his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather. Now, let's think about Stanley at this point, because he is our main character. He's the only character that we're getting any background and things on at this point. So we know he's going to be our main character. So what are qualities that we can pick out about Stanley by either thinking about his thoughts, his words, or his feelings on what I just read? So I want you to take a minute and jot them down on your Teen Talk. What do you think are some qualities of Stanley? All right, so there's a couple that kind of jump out to me. On page 7, it talks about how he was innocent of his crime. So that tells me that he's a good kid. You know, identify a quality he's a good kid. It says he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. So that's one of the big things that jumps out to me. In that not only is he a good kid, but maybe he's careless. You know, let's think about it. He is in the wrong place at the wrong time. And is he there just because, oops, I happen to be here? Or is he there because he didn't really think about the full extent of, you know, what could happen by being there? We've not really read enough yet to decide that. So I would have to say maybe careless and put a question mark to see if when we get a little further in the reading, if that would make sense. I'd like you to take just a moment and break your questions down. I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to watch the timer here on the camera. So you got a minute. Now, while you're finishing that up, I do want to talk about our story. This narrative story, there's a movie that was made from the story. And the movie goes really close to the book. But what I'm wanting you to understand, and parents that might be going through this video or going through the book with your child, the questions are not always about the story itself. Our questions always go back to the skill, okay? And this is the skill that we're working on, identifying qualities of the main character. So even if they watched the movie, they will not necessarily do well with the questions. Some kids will because it's a skill that they're good at. Where some kids won't. It just depends on where your student or your child's strengths are. If identifying quality traits is something that they grasp really quickly or easily, then this will be like a no big deal. But as we go through, because we will be doing this quality through till I think Monday or Tuesday of the next week, because remember, it takes us 2 days to get through one Team Talk day. And we did better with understanding that concept the week before spring break. In that it's that same kind of cycle going on here. So this whole packet that you've got in your hand is going to be about identifying qualities, okay? So even though you might have watched the movie, even though you might own the movie, doesn't really mean that that's going to help you a lot. Sorry, I'm trying to get more comfortable on the questions. All right, now, on your Team Talk, I want you to write pages 9 through 15. That's where the evidence is going to come from these particular questions. One of the things that when I went back and I was looking through a lot of the comments from the last week of class was kids struggling with finding evidence. So I want to be more purposeful, allowing you to know where your evidence is coming from. So for these Team Talk questions, it's pages 9 through 15. All right. So let's pick our book back up. Page 9. Well, Stanley's father was also Stanley Yelnats. And Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. Everyone in his family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats was spelled the same frontward and backward. So they kept naming their son Stanley. Stanley was an only child, as was every other Stanley Yelnats before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's father liked to say, I learned from failure. But perhaps that was part of the curse as well. If Stanley and his father weren't always hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt so much every time their hopes were crushed. Not every Stanley Yelnats has been a failure, Stanley's mother often pointed out, whenever Stanley or his father became so discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. While the first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market, he couldn't have been too unlucky. At such times, she neglected to mention the bad luck that befell the first Stanley Yelnats. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by the outlaw Kissin' Kate Barlow. If it weren't for that, Stanley's family would now be living in a mansion on a beach in California. Instead, they were crammed in a tiny apartment that smelled of burning rubber and foot odor. If only, if only. Well, the apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. The first person who finds a use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man. It was this latest project that led to Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by Kissin' Kate Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on the beach in California, but it was still kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow didn't actually kiss Stanley's great-grandfather. That would have been really cool. But she only kissed the man she killed. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. Well, the bus was slowing down, and the guard grunted as he stretched his arms. "Welcome to Camp Green Lake," said the driver. And Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see a lake, and hardly anything was green. Chapter 4. Well, Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuffs and let him off the bus. He'd been on the bus for over 8 hours. "Be careful," the bus driver said as Stanley walked down the steps. Well, Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful going down the steps or if he was telling him to be careful at Camp Green Lake. "Thanks for the ride," he said. His mouth was dry and his throat hurt, and he stepped into the hard, dry dirt. There was a band of sweat around his wrist where the handcuffs had been. The land was barren and desolate, and he could see a few run-down buildings and some tents. Farther away, there was a cabin beneath 2 tall trees. Those 2 trees were the only plant life that he could see. There weren't even weeds. Well, the guard led Stanley to a small building. A sign out front said, "You are entering Camp Green Lake Juvenile Correctional Facility." Next to it was another sign, which declared that it was a violation of the Texas Penal Code to bring guns, explosive weapons, drugs, or alcohol into the premises. As Stanley read the sign, he couldn't help but think, "Well, duh." And the guard led Stanley into the building, where he felt the welcome relief of air conditioning. A man was sitting with his feet up on a desk, and he turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered. But otherwise, he didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited while the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. "That's a lot of sunflower seeds," the bus guard said. And Stanley noticed a burlap sack filled with sunflower seeds on the floor next to the desk. "I quit smoking last month," said the man in the cowboy hat. And he had a tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm. And as he signed his name, the snake's rattle seemed to wiggle. I used to smoke a pack every day, and now we eat a snack of these every week. And the guard laughed. Well, there must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk, because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. And for a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him. But the man gave one to the guard and said the other was for the driver. 9 hours here and 9 hours back, the guard grumbled. What a day. I'm going to stop right there and let you kind of look at your questions to see where you would find your evidence at, okay? I'm going to write down a few things too. All right, so this is a great place for us to stop. This day one in our team talk always is a little longer for us as we begin exploring what this end in mind is all about. So there'll be no questions for homework today. So we'll pick right back up here in a moment. And by a moment, I mean I'll start right back. So see you in a sec.